You're watching Iowa Public Television.
Disclosure about the president's role in the Iran-Contra affair. Our top story tonight on Washington Week in Review. Ford Motor Company, worldwide manufacturer of automotive products, has provided funding for this program. At Ford, quality is job one. Additional funding is provided by Ford Aerospace and Communications Corporation, a leader in advanced technology. Now here's moderator Paul Duke.
Good evening. More and more, the Iranian affair is resembling one of those old silent movies where the daredevil goes from one crazy episode to another, usually just a step ahead of the train. In this case, the train is speeding up. This week, an explosion of important new developments about more clandestine White House operations, of attempts to start a war against Libya, of conflicting testimony involving the president, and of a White House racked by a great deal of strife. On a different track, the man chosen to head the CIA, Robert Gates, ran into a wall of bipartisan congressional criticism about that agency's involvement in the Iranian episode. All of this obviously will figure in the next presidential campaign, a campaign that apparently will not include one prominent Democrat, Mario Cuomo of New York, who says he'll sit it out. Here now, sitting round our table, Howard Fineman of Newsweek, Haynes Johnson of the Washington Post, Charles Corddry of the Baltimore Sun, and Jack Nelson of the Los Angeles Times. Jack, the Iranian affair was busting out all over in a variety of new directions this week.
Well, you know, it's been almost it's been 3.5 months since this thing first broke. And this week, to begin with, you had a number of reports that came out from knowledgeable sources about what the Tower Commission is going to report next week. And it really is devastating. I had somebody tell me that this entire operation was so sloppy that every time they turned around, there was another screw-up. The report, we're reliably told, is going to criticize President Reagan, his chief of staff, his secretary of state, his defense secretary, his CIA director, a former CIA director, and as this person said, nobody's going to come out of it looking good. It's going to be a very critical report. It's going to show that Casey, the former CIA director, knew more than he said, that he was out soliciting funds for the Contras from several foreign countries. It's going to show that there's $20 million that the commission doesn't know where it is, $10 million from the profits of the sale of arms to Iran, $10 million from the Sultan of Brunei, who contributed that at the request of the State Department.
Money which supposedly was going to help the Contras in Nicaragua.
That's right, but it's missing. And in addition to that, of course, maybe the most damaging thing is evidence of a cover-up. And then there's, which you mentioned before, the conflicting testimony of Robert McFarlane, the former National Security Assistant, and Don Regan, the Chief of Staff, and the change of testimony by President Reagan concerning whether or not he had authorized the first shipment of arms by Israel to Iran. And then there was more, even today. I mean, today you had the revelation that the State Department had to head off an invasion of Libya that was supposed to be carried out by the United States and Egypt. The reports that we had was that there were some crazies over at the NSC who wanted to pull this thing off. And in addition to that, you had one other disclosure, and that was a finding or a directive that the President signed in January of last year, which would authorize the CIA to go to foreign countries, seize suspected terrorists, and bring them back to this country for trial.
Let me ask you something, Jack. You said, and then there was more. Every day there's more, you're right. But this question gets closer to the president now. At the White House today, they actually had to go to the limits of denying there was a cover-up and denying presidential involvement. What are we going to learn about that?
Well, you know, we do know that the president authorized the sale of arms to Iran. I mean, he did that in the finding, and he's admitted that. And that's what I think has been the most damaging thing politically. Whether he ever was involved in any actual cover-up, we don't have any real evidence of that, at least certainly not as of now. But there definitely is evidence that there was a cover-up attempt. Now, for example, Robert McFarland testified before the Tower Commission that he helped construct an erroneous chronology of the events concerning the Iranian arms sale, and the reason for it was to give a deniability to the president so that he could say he did not order the shipment of arms.
Jack, there's been something approaching a political hanging party out in Washington for the last couple of months for Don Regan, the president's chief of staff. And as I understand it, there's some evidence about his possible involvement in what is now being called a cover-up. Is that going to finally see Don Regan leaving the White House?
Well, I don't know whether that in itself will turn out to be as specific. I don't know that anybody has any real evidence that Don Regan, say, directed all of this, but he certainly must have had some knowledge of it because he took this erroneous chronology to the president. So he must have had some knowledge of it. But in addition to that, the whole way this operation was carried out in a White House where the chief of staff said that he was involved in everything that was going on, I think is going to look so bad for him when the report comes out that next week is going to be the crunch. I've had somebody tell me he's likely to leave next week.
Don Regan still is hanging in there, though, Jack, but we had stories this week suggesting that his real enemy at the White House now is Nancy Reagan.
Well, you know, it was interesting, Paul, because the report came from Chris Wallace, the NBC correspondent, who, as we know, is a pretty good friend of Nancy Reagan's. And so I think you can say that that's a pretty good source. And what he reported was that twice the chief of staff hung up the telephone on Nancy Reagan. I talked to somebody about that today who's a very close friend of Nancy Reagan, and they said they thought that must be the end of the line for Don Regan. You know, Nancy Reagan has been interested in getting Regan out of the White House for some time because of this Iranian affair, and the president has resisted it because he says, I'm not going to throw him to the wolves, and because they have that close personal relationship.
Jack, throughout this whole thing since November, this sort of self-anointed guy in the white hat has been the Secretary of State. He didn't like any of the stuff that had been going on, and he's going to be clobbered apparently by the Tower Commission. What do you make of this? Is this a sin of omission that he's committed?
I think it is, Charlie. I think that as one of the sources on the commission told me, he absented himself from his duties. He knew what was going on. He did very little to try to stop it. And by the way, Defense Secretary Weinberger as well. But I think Schultz more than that. I think it'll come down fairly heavily.
There are many people out in the country who say that those of us here in Washington are covering this, making too much of the story. If that's true, why isn't the president going out into the country himself to try to rally some public support?
Well, I think the president knows to begin with he can't rally much public support, and of course I don't agree with the thing that we're making too much of it. I think it is one a tremendous story, and I think it has sort of spelled almost the end of the Reagan presidency. Even though you got to say that the president, you know, he does bounce back a lot of times. We don't know that. Today he made a speech, for example, to a group of conservatives in Washington, and he said, you know, some of the pundits are trying to pull down the curtain before the last act is over, and he said from his experiences as an actor, he says he is saving the best stuff for the last act, so maybe that's what he's doing.
Well, before we get to the last act, I want to turn to you, Charlie, and ask you, how serious are these latest disclosures about Mr. Reagan as to what Jack was suggesting just a moment ago, that he had changed his testimony to the Tower Commission?
Paul, the president changed his testimony to this commission that he had appointed on a key matter in the whole thing, it seems to me. It bears on the administration of U.S. laws, and it bears on the credibility of the president, of McFarland, and of Reagan. Now, what did he do? The commission interviewed the president on the 26th of January, and he told them that he had clearly authorized the initial shipment of weapons from Israel to Iran. On the 11th of February, The commission went to see him again, and they raised this matter. And so I'm told the president got up, walked across to his desk, picked up a sheet of paper from which he read, and said he could not find any indication that he had indeed approved those shipments. So the question then is, who is telling the truth here, and why did the president change his story? And I think that it's significant that he had spent a lot of time with Donald Reagan in the between the two sessions.
Didn't he tell the commission that he had, after a lengthy session with Don Reagan, he decided he had not authorized it?
Yeah, and you know, nobody that I have talked to, and I talked to the vice chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee just before coming here, Senator Bill Cohen, believes for one moment that McFarland lied when he testified under oath that the president had approved the shipment of arms. Now, why it's important, because the president must approve a shipment from a second country to the third country of American arms, and the Israelis wouldn't dare do it without approval, and Bud McFarland wouldn't dare have given the approval when it was opposed by Schultz and Weinberger, unless he had got it from somewhere. So the unresolved question is why the president changed.
Charlie, isn't there a legal question here? Because you're talking about illegal shipments or sales of arms, and that's one reason why not just the president's credibility, but possibly some legal matters.
Yeah, it would be illegal if he had not authorized it, and the Israelis would not have done it. As the defense minister of Israel said in an interview with the Post, they wouldn't ship one screw out of Israel without approval from Washington.
Charlie, let me ask you, where does this leave our policy toward Central America? The Contras, after all of this diversion of funds, we still don't know how much money is missing, a lot of them is missing. But where does it leave the Contras and our policy toward aiding them?
Yeah, this I think is the thing that the special counsel investigating this whole business is going to have to deal with, and the congressional investigations. I think the Tower Commission has been mainly concerned with the foreign policy implications, but here you have had an administration which has moved heaven and earth to keep the Contras in business. And
the reason for so much of the secrecy, too.
All kinds of secrecy and funneling of money and so on. And here the Contras have really, they're a collection of little armies. And this week, Arturo Cruz and Alfonso Rebello agreed to stay in the Contra operation under a great deal of pressure from the United States. They had been originally in the Sandinista government and had got out of it, got into the Contra business, but the real hardliner, who is Calero, Adolfo Calero, has the big army. He wants to overthrow the government of Managua. Well, the significance of this, it seems to me, among others, is that if Cruz jumps out of this thing, there is no hope of getting a support in Congress for continued money for the Contras. So the administration has put together a Contra force. Well, it's orchestrated, directed from Washington, from the State Department.
Is there, in fact, any possibility of further Contra aid support in Congress anyway?
I wouldn't bet against it. I mean, I know the Foreign Relations Committee of the Senate voted against even continuing the present appropriation, and of course the president will veto that. But I mean, we're talking about another $100 million sometime way down the road this year, and I wouldn't want to bet one way or the other.
And we had all these wild things being hatched in the White House basement, Charlie. It seems that the Katzenjammer kids were running wild. What do you make of this bizarre episode that we were planning with Egypt, or trying to plan with Egypt, an invasion of Libya?
You know, there was an elder statesman and former Secretary of State in this town named Dean Acheson who once took a dislike to somebody in a new administration. He said he reminded him of a boomerang thrower practicing his art in a crowded room. And it seems to me it's applicable. Here you have a plan hatched apparently in the CIA and in the NSC staff to invade Libya in 1985, and as one of the CIA officials was quoted, to rearrange the map of North Africa. The State Department, Schultz wants to put Gaddafi back in his box, but he didn't want to do it that way, apparently. The State Department brought the ambassador back from Cairo, and in this case, they went to work and they quashed the whole thing, which once again raises the question, why wasn't Schultz able to stop this Iranian business? And then the kidnapping. We're going to kidnap terrorists, bring them home, and try them. There's nothing, there's nothing there that Israel hasn't done many times, but the whole thing doesn't show much cohesion and unity in the...
Well, to move from one example to another, we had additional evidence this week as well, Haynes, that the CIA was much more involved in all of this than had originally been indicated or they had acknowledged. And it came at a time when the new chief of the CIA faced the griddle on Capitol Hill.
Well, not new chief yet, a designated chief, Robert Gates, whose nomination is up for the Senate for confirmation, who has been the #2 man to William Casey. And as Jack mentioned, it is not a good time for the CIA. It has not come out well on this. Further disclosures are almost daily about their involvement. Charlie, you just mentioned one in your last recounting of it. But there's something else that happened this week in these hearings for the confirmation process of Robert Gates to be the next CIA director, that it was extremely important, it seems to me, to step back a minute and look at it. You mentioned it was 3.5 months ago that this whole thing began. Actually, it was 3 months ago next Wednesday when we learned about the diversion of money to the Contras and the scandal, and all of a sudden these household names that are now household names, Oliver North and the rest, became front and center. Think back to the first hearing when Ollie North went up to the Hill in his uniform. They were falling all over him. I mean, raising the congressmen, raising money for him, helping him for his defense fund, quoting Kipling and Gunga Din and barracks ballads. No, seriously, this hearing this week, these 3 days, 2 days public hearings on the Hill for Gates were a dramatically different tone. First of all, they were bipartisanly tough, right across the board, putting Gates on the griddle about his knowledge, the agency's involvement, why they didn't understand, why didn't they ask questions. What came out of it was a public record and a quite clear signal that the rules have changed. Congress is going to assert itself. They made a record, they built a record. They have got young Mr. Gates, if he is to be, he's 43 years old, if he's going to be the next CIA director, he is now on record as saying, yes, he would resign under certain circumstances if the president asked him to do something that wasn't according to the law. He would directly go to the Congress immediately, tell them he would not sanction findings, legal findings of covert actions by post-dating them, as has happened in the Iranian affair. So the whole tone and tenor of what happened is different now, dramatically different.
But Haynes, couldn't it have been maybe a mistake on the administration's part in the first place to send up the #2 man in an agency that was under serious investigation? He was there when a lot of that was going on. Now, Senator Robert Byrd, the Senate Majority Leader, for example, said this morning he thought it was a very big mistake and that it put him in a very awkward position of having to try to vote on this man, who he says may be a very fine gentleman. But he said between now and the time all these investigations are completed, he doesn't know. It may turn out that Gates was more involved than we know.
Well, it may turn out to have been a mistake by the administration, Jack. That remains to be seen. But I think what happened in the hearings, at least, and the people, I've talked to 4 people today on the committee on the Hill, and my sense of it quite clearly, as of now, Mr. Gates will be confirmed. They've built the record. They have the case made. He's a different kind of person than the other agency directors in their history, going back to Allen Dulles. He's young. He's an analyst. He has a kind of background that's.
But he'll go in under a cloud.
Well, the cloud is already there. It hangs over the agency, and the question now is what he will do. I mean, Bill Cohen. You mentioned you talked to Bill Cohen. So did I today. We're tapping around, and who's the vice chairman of the committee and the Republican, as he put it at the end of the hearings. These public hearings were held to make sure the public understood exactly what had happened and that there was a record made. And there was a clarity.
They're still going on, too, though, aren't they?
Of course they are.
I mean, there's no telling when it'll end.
It's going to be 2 weeks before there'll be a vote on the confirmation process. The Tower Commission report will come out. They don't expect much to damage Mr. Gates further. I think he will be confirmed.
Haynes, as I understand it, the administration did consider and even kind of halfway offer that job to some other people who didn't take it. But now that Gates is up there and they've grilled him, do the members of Congress really believe in his assurances, or are they trying to build a public record for themselves as well that they've expressed concern about this? I mean, how do you run a spy operation if you don't have some secrecy?
Howard, the real problem in this case we've talked about so much now is that Congress has an oversight responsibility, and Congress did fail in exercising its oversight capabilities in the entire arms, Contra, Iranian, CIA, and the CIA, as we now know so clearly under Mr. Casey, willfully violated all the sanctions. I mean, they were running around and so forth. So, yes, there's a record made by Mr. Gates. He has said, you asked, do they believe him? The record's there. If they don't, if he violates it, he'll be yanked. He won't, and I think he quite demonstrated. Bill Bradley asked, Senator Bradley of New Jersey, the Democrat, asked him the question, you just buck it up and so forth, and what will happen if the president asks you to do something, and won't you come? He said, I'll come right away. The first thing I'll do is get in the car and come right to the Congress.
You think he got the message then?
There's no question he got the message, Paul. Absolutely. The question is, the CIA is going to come out differently from this process. I think the damage over the covert operations, the real intelligence like mining the harbors and on all the ships at sea and so forth, I think that day is not past, but it's certainly ending.
There's a new book out, The Second Oldest Profession.
Yes.
It's about how intelligence isn't all that good anyway. When they fail, they blame it on not having enough money, and it develops a conspiratorial attitude and so on. You're saying there's a new day dawning for CIA
Yes,
to become an analytical agency?
Well, there's always been a conflict, Charlie, between the operators, so-called, and the analysts. And I think what you're going to see more of is an assertion now, as Bill Cohen said to me, more of the analysts going back to look at the data of intelligence to make intelligent decisions on formulation of policy.
Howard, you were an analyst a couple of weeks ago. You went to see Mario Cuomo. You came away. You told me personally that you felt he probably was not going to run for president, and sure enough, you were right.
Well, the reason I thought that, Paul, is that anybody who's going to run for president, I think, has to have some steely determination to do it. And even accounting for Mario Cuomo's kind of philosophical bent, I thought he was taking a little too much time and being a little too equivocal about it. I mean, he joked with us in this luncheon that we had with him about the fire in the belly, the notion that a presidential candidate had to have a fire in the belly. And he said, it sounds to me like a bunch of people running around with indigestion. What do I necessarily need that for? He made a lot of those kinds of comments. So why didn't he do it? I think there's several reasons, both personal and political. I think the deceptively simple answer is that he didn't want to. He just didn't want to do it. Why didn't he want to do it? I think personally he had concerns about his family. I think he also had an almost kind of fatalistic sense about what it would be to be an identifiable Italian-American running for the presidency. He repeatedly talked about that problem. He tried to dismiss it, but I don't think he ever dismissed it. I think it kind of got to him. It bothered him. He didn't want to overcome. He didn't think he could overcome it. Another, I think, was an analogy that he made to the mayor's race in 1977 in New York, where against his better judgment, he says, he was pushed into that race, and Mayor Ed Koch clobbered him, and he hasn't forgotten that. I think on the personal side, he had concerns about his son Andrew, who's now a lawyer in New York, and there were charges made in the governor's race that Cuomo won, that Andrew was exercising undue influence. I think he saw politically that he really didn't have, despite the respect that a lot of Democrats had for him, he didn't have the staff, he didn't have the experience traveling around the country, he wasn't sure he could win, and I think beyond that, even if he were to win, he wasn't sure he wanted to be president. He said to us in this interview that, you know, the next president could be a Democratic Hoover. All the problems of the Reagan years, and some of the ones we've been talking about tonight in terms of foreign policy, as well as the budget deficit and taxes, could all land on the head of the next Democratic president. He didn't necessarily want to do it.
Howard, the obvious question is this changes the landscape. I mean, before this happened, there was Mario Cuomo and sort of everybody else. And whatever Mario Cuomo might have done in the campaign, in the race, he certainly had a point of view that was different. I mean, articulated a kind of view about the Democratic Party.
Well, I think a lot of that point of view might be represented in this campaign, perhaps not as eloquently as Cuomo would have done it, but it would be represented. There's a story going around that the staffers in former Senator Gary Hart's Washington campaign office broke out into cheers when they heard the story that Cuomo wasn't going to be running.
He also represented the heart and soul of the Democratic Party to a lot of people because he had preached the old-time religion. We all remember that famous speech he made at the 1984 convention. Is there anybody else on the Democratic horizon who can rouse the faithful in the same fashion?
Well, the interesting thing is that that all of the so-called neoliberals and kind of technocratic Democrats, many of whom are going to be in this race this time, are now all going to be challenged to see whether they can give a rousing speech. Gary Hart, as I said, is the front runner. That's been a problem for him before in terms of turning on a crowd, but he's a very determined guy and he will study hard. He's the front runner. I think you're going to see more attention also paid to people like Senator Joe Biden of Delaware, Representative Dick Gephardt of Missouri, who's going to be actually announcing his candidacy. former Governor Babbitt of Arizona, and some others. I think some others are going to be looking at it. Mike Dukakis, the governor of Massachusetts, is almost certainly going to jump in this thing now, and others are going to take another look.
Let me go back just a minute to a reason he got out, though. You sort of alluded to it a little bit, but I did not see where he was quoted as saying he didn't want his family maybe to undergo the kind of scrutiny, and he didn't want to undergo the kind of scrutiny he'd have to go.
I think that's right.
Undergo.
I think that's right. I think that he was almost obsessed about criticism that might befall his son Andrew, who was his chief political advisor and now is off on his own as a lawyer.
And there has been criticism.
And has been criticized for using undue influence in Albany with his father.
Skin too, right?
Well, Mario Cuomo's been known to call up reporters and critique their performance, so to speak, both in print and otherwise. And I think he got the sense that even though he might have mastered the media in New York City, which I think he's done, that to do that minute by minute, day after day in a national campaign would be difficult. And actually, he won a landslide victory in his governor's race a few months back, but ever since the national spotlight was focused on him after that, he's kind of gone down in the polls as he's picked fights and other people have picked fights
Howard,
with him.
is this unique, or is there some epidemic here that's going to start? He looks down the Hudson to the Potomac, he says, nobody can be a successful president in that town, I don't want to go
No,
there.
I don't think the political legions are short of people who think they can handle the job. And I think he thinks he could handle the job.
People who ought to think they can handle the job, how about that?
No, I think there are people who want the job, plenty of them.
You have...
Well, my job is to bring all this to a reasonable conclusion. Before I do that, I'd like to make a small announcement that our friend Howard has joined the ranks of fatherhood. A baby daughter was born, Meredith was born this week. Father obviously is doing well. We presume mother and daughter are too. Next week, you're invited to a birthday party as we celebrate our 20th anniversary here on public broadcasting. 2 decades of reporting and commenting on all the major stories, so please make your reservation now to join us right here next week as we look back at history in the making. Till then, I'm Paul Duke. Good night for all of us here on Washington Week.
Washington Week in Review was produced by WETA, which is solely responsible for its content. Ford Motor Company, worldwide manufacturer of automotive products, has provided funding for this program. At Ford, quality is job one. Additional funding is provided by Ford Aerospace and Communications Corporation, a leader in advanced technology. For a transcript of Washington Week, send $3 to PTV Publications, Box 701, Kent, Ohio, 44240. Please specify program date.
They helped put the first American on the moon. Did they also help commit Nazi war crimes?
I contributed a great deal to put the first man on the moon.
German scientists were brought to the U.S. at the end of World War II to start the American space program. Were they really Nazi criminals? Watch The Nazi Connection on Frontline.
Be watching Tuesday at 8.
May 13th, 1985. In a quiet Philadelphia neighborhood, police engage in a confrontation with a group called Move. The result is catastrophic. 11 lives are lost, 61 homes are destroyed, and a city is outraged.
I was agonizing because that's not what I asked for. That's not what I expected.
The bombing of Osage Avenue.
Tuesday night at 9, following Frontline.
You're watching Iowa Public Television.
Iowa broadcasts of Wall Street Week are made possible in part by the investment brokers of Dane Bosworth, with offices in Cedar Rapids, Davenport, Des Moines, Dubuque, Iowa City, Sioux City, and Waterloo.